With that, I am introducing AnaYelsi Velasco-Sanchez, the person who, again, has been the foundation of me doing this work, who has taught so many and empowered so many across the country. Thank you so much. I'm gonna pin our two screens here. 1 second. But yeah, give it up for AnaYelsi. We love her.
Thank you. Hi.
Cool. Let me do a little bit more technical work to make sure that we're all good and safe here. I'm spotlighting you. I'm spotlighting myself. Again, for those who are joining now, we will. This will just be a good old conversation between two friends who've been working together for a long time, doing this work of justice. The chat is yours to get in and have a good time. But we're gonna talk to each other, and then on the following gathering, we'll have a deeper debrief of everything. Let me see. Add spotlight. There we go. Now it's the two of us. So now that I've done my double introduction, tell us a little bit more of the specifics about yourself, what you're doing now, who you are, where you come from. Go for it, AnaYelsi.
Sure. Thank you. First, I love you, Darren, and I'm gonna do it wrong. How's Gen Z doing hearts now? I can't do the Gen Z one. I'm going old school.
Are you talking about, because that's Korean.
Yeah, they like do something like, I don't know. Anyhow, I love you. Yeah, so a little bit about me. I'm in Washington, D.C. I've been here, August will be 9 years, and I live with my husband, Matt, and our two little fur babies. They're rats named Bruno and Felix, like Encanto. And I do all of the work that Darren just named. I'm also a writer and a painter, and that's a big part of my calling, my ministry, whatever language you want to use. I really think the creative arts and healing arts are crucial to this work, and I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit. And what else about me? Yeah, I love to cook. I live with mental health struggles and chronic pain and chronic illness issues. And yeah, I've spent the last 5 years building my business hopefully in a way that lets me be a little more authentic about my needs and my boundaries and stuff. And so I'm sort of figuring it out as I go along.
Yeah. Tell us the name of your business.
It's called AVS Consulting. So.
And what is AVS doing in the world at the moment?
Well, I'll give you an example. I just got back, so if I seem a little tired, I apologize. I spent my afternoon with one of my clients or partners, which is a congregation here in DC, and I did the work with them that I'm doing with a lot of folks around the country, which is training people, one, on a framework that I've spent the last 6 or 7 years developing called Interlocking Justice, which is my approach to doing justice work and what I think is a holistic and accessible and sustainable way. And so, yeah, I do that. And sometimes that looks like getting into the nitty gritty work of racial justice. Sometimes it looks like just talking about a more amorphous, just how do we approach all of this work, and incorporates everything: healing, arts, embodiment work, somatic work. Like, I think it's we got to engage spirit, mind, body, all of it.
For sure. And so yeah, so we've done a lot of work over time, work of empowering people, talking about like what we're doing, and even in the name of you talking about your company doing this interlocking justice. For those who might not be familiar, could you tell us a little bit more about what that concept is?
Sure. So I'm 38 years old, and I have been in nonprofit work literally since like my first foray into the church and adult work life, or like 17, 18. So it has been a long time in a lot of different spaces, in different states, in different cities, on different issues with different communities. And the thing that I kept kind of running smack up into was the reality that, like, it did not matter where it was or who it was with. We just kept recreating all of the very things that we said we were about dismantling. Whether it was intentionally or not, it's just we were socialized in a specific way, and with lack of intentionality, we just started rebuilding the very things we were trying to challenge. And that meant like a lot of toxic behavior. And I won't get into like all the details of the many ways in which that manifests. But my response to that after I left my last organization was just like, I cannot do this anymore. Like I didn't have it in me to go and start applying to jobs with another nonprofit. I was too hurt, too burnt out. And so I, one, had a pretty bad depressive episode season. And I name that because I think it's very real. And I think it happens to a lot of us when we get disillusioned and hurt, especially in spaces that we think are safe for us. But when I saw myself on the other side of that, I had a chance to think about, well, how do I want to do this differently? And the answer for me was interlocking justice. And so I developed this framework, and it is all built off of 5 practices that are meant to help us address every facet of who we are, how we function, and how we move in doing justice work. And so like, if I had to encapsulate that in one little sentence, I would say, I keep telling people, it is not just about doing justice. It is about how we do justice, who we are in the midst of doing justice. And so I no longer think it's acceptable to lose people along the way, and to burn people out, and to dispose of people, and to hurt one another in the process just because the goal is good or right or just or holy. And so interlocking justice is about, well, how do we do this better?
Yeah. And for me, I often work from this framework of intersectionality, and interlocking justice and intersectionality interlock really well together.
Very much so.
From similar backgrounds of women of color who have been helping us to see what the work is, right?
For years and years and years.
Yeah. And sometimes I'll even hear people use the word like, well, we want a more intersectional church. And it's just like,
what do you mean?
Intersectionality, right, isn't the new replacement for the word diversity, right?
Right.
It's not.
But that's how they're treating it. Yeah. No, for sure, that's how they're treating it.
And it reminds me of several things. It reminds me of how, and I was just sharing this at, you just spent the day working with the church. I've spent the last couple of days facilitating a retreat around faith, gender, and sexuality. And there always comes this one point where people have heard the stories, their hearts have broken, and they're ready to do something.
Yeah.
And it usually comes out in this ways of I want to do the intersectionality. I want to, it's like find the buzzwords and pull it together. Right. And I want to do
the checklist.
Right.
Yeah.
And I had to really help us to pause and to pull back, because before the person who was sharing realized it, they were asking a very specific practical question. How can I go and reach, this particular kind of people group or this particular kind of church? And the room, because it was one of those controversial topics, the room was like, well, what about this? And this isn't going to work, and that's going to work. And while that was rich and people were bouncing all across the room, and we could have started the organization right then, the person who originally asked the question was on the verge of tears. And I like shut everything down, and I was like, wait, what's coming up for you? And what the person shared was that their heart was breaking, and they just wanted to make things better. They just didn't want to see LGBTQ folks hurt anymore. But we're often worried about how to do. And it's like, no, sometimes we need to sit in a lament.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we got to let our hearts break.
Yeah.
And learn something from the breaking of our hearts, other than how do we hurry up and fix it?
Yep.
And I wanted to name that because in so many ways, I do see you living in the moment so much more often. And maybe this is a good spot to talk a little bit about chronic illness and long-term disability. I don't know if you use that word for yourself or not.
I do. Yeah. I'm learning to be more comfortable with it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you, as much as you're comfortable, what could you share about your experience with that?
Yeah, sure. So I will try and keep this fairly brief. Okay. So both in terms of my illnesses and in terms of my disability, it's invisible. And so um, it's been a process. Like when I say I'm learning to say, yes, I have a disability. Yes, I'm disabled. Some of that has been like, can I even use that language? And I've had to like undo some of the internalized ableism that I have. And in that process, it's been coming to terms with, well, I spent so much of my 20s ignoring a lot of pain I was in, and also not feeling pain to the same severity I am now that I'm, seeing 40s in the right on the horizon. But I had an injury when I was 15 years old, growing up in the foster care system. I was not taken to the doctor. I didn't receive the the medical care that I needed. And so what could have been, hurt, healed, moved on, has become a lifelong disability that, to quote my doctor, is degenerative and will only get worse as I get older. So like lots of fun times ahead. And it has lately, the last few years, I'm actually in a lot of pain right at this moment. I have a lot of pain, and sometimes it's to the point where like I can't leave the bed. And I add to that chronic migraines, really severe chronic migraines, diabetes, and then I've had a few years of chronic illness, health problems that they have not been able to identify the cause of yet. So it's doctors after doctors, and poked and prodded, and it's all in your head, and lose a little bit of weight because fat phobia and sexism and racism are really fun trifecta when it comes to medical care. And so it's been a learning, like a personal learning process in the midst of also wanting to teach others. So I think my body decided for me that I couldn't function in the same way capitalism had been telling me to function in past years. It's not an option for me anymore.
Yeah, and one of the bittersweet blessings of the pandemic was that I had my routines disrupted so much so that the coping mechanisms that I had developed and been taught through the years finally had a chance to rest. And it was like, as we started getting back to being busy and let's get back to normal, air quotes everywhere, my body was like, absolutely not. I can't do those. I can't fake it like I used to.
Yeah.
And it was a little disorienting because it was just like, okay, why am I crying because I can't sit in a Zoom meeting, right? Why am I just, my house is a complete and utter disaster of chaos because I can't like just clean up or just do some of the things that I used to be able to do. And I realized that I was, in the past, I had so many things that were just running off momentum. But if I really had a chance to stop and rest and sit down for a minute, that's when I finally realized it was like, oh, I can't because all those things were just, it was almost like falling dominoes. It was just like, well, this would fall, that would fall, and it would just keep going. But that wasn't intentional progress. That wasn't work. And then you mentioned that part about capitalism in there of the drive to just keep going wasn't because I was feeling good. It was just because this is how I show myself as useful. This is what we're supposed to do.
Right. You got to keep me around if I'm serving you in this way constantly.
Right? And I remember really taking a lot of inspiration from you and from Jade T. Perry, who both of you are the first people I've known to have an email autoresponder that says, listen, I am not going to get back to you.
I have boundaries.
Right. I have boundaries. I have chronic illness. I have stuff I'm dealing with. And just so you know, I'll be getting back to you when I'm able. And I was like, that's a thing.
Yeah, and full credit to Jade, because I was inspired by Jade's email response, and that's when I started using mine a few years ago. And so all credit to Jade.
Yeah. That really, Jade, our email responder, the way she and the Mystic Soul Project gathered this gathering where they said right up at the front, it was like, we are not going to run on time.
Mm-mm.
It was a Mystic Soul Project was a gathering that was centered on people of color, and it was an invitation for us to think about what it means to do our Christianity and our spiritual practice
Yes.
outside of colonization and these
Yep.
Western demands.
Yeah.
And so one of those demands is often that everything's supposed to fit neatly into your conference schedule, and all the things
Yep.
start at a certain time, end at a certain time. And to be late for something is rude and all these other,
Disrespectful. Yeah.
oh,
Inconsiderate.
right.
Yeah.
Clearly you don't value the time of the speaker. And instead they reframed it, and they were just saying, no, we know that sometimes the spirit's calling you to stay someplace longer. And
Right.
sometimes a thing lingers, and sometimes you run into a conversation in the hallway, and that's fine. And we've built in space for that. And we
Yeah.
don't want anybody to feel like they have to be in a certain time or in a certain space at a certain
Right.
time.
Right. Rhythm over time.
Yes, that was it.
Yeah.
Rhythm over
Rhythm over
time.
time.
That reminds me of a oh wait. Oh Lord, my brain's running all over the place now. Oh, it was reminding me of another piece of something that I've learned from you. Well, yeah, if you have more room to talk about it, um, your social media isn't just all your good days.
No. Mm-mm.
How did you get there?
I got
And
there
what does
because I
that
was
look
too
like
tired.
for
I
those who
was too
don't follow
tired to
you?
curate. Like real, like very real answer. I do not have the energy to like like between all the chronic health and disability stuff I just named, and then you throw in CPTSD and anxiety and depression and ADHD. And then you just throw in the busyness of my schedule, and like I've been in 3 different states in the last month and a half. Um, so you throw all of that together. I do not have time to perfectly curate my social media so that I don't know, to fit my brand or whatever it is. And I don't mean to say that with such snark. I apologize. I think that I've seen some beautiful timelines. I don't have that capacity. And I think what it has freed me up to do is, for better or worse, and I will not lie, it's gotten me in trouble a couple times. But for better or worse, I put all of me out there. So you're gonna get, if I can speak real frank, like you're gonna get the like depression, doom pile surrounded in the bed, haven't showered in 3-day photos, and you're gonna get the interlocking justice 101 memes, and you're gonna get some thirst traps if I'm having a good day and I'm feeling
Yes,
myself.
thirst
Like
traps.
it's all of the things are gonna be on my social media. And I think that even when I've been like kind of scared of like, oh, that's the one that's just gonna go too far or piss people off or make people too uncomfortable, I feel like on a regular basis I have had somebody reach out and say, oh my God, thank you for posting that. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for being that blunt, that honest, because now I feel like I can say something or do something. And so that to me is far more important than every once in a while, like rattling some cages. So
This makes me want to go 2 places, but I remember my earlier thought, and you can maybe tie this in, and I'll come to my next one. You were also the beginning of me thinking about decolonizing and seeing that as an important part of, frankly, everything.
yeah.
Where did that come from for you? And what is that? Has that continued to evolve for you? Like,
Absolutely.
yeah, what does that look like?
Absolutely. It was a survival tactic. It's I think for folks of color, for folks of Indigenous descent, like myself, for reconnecting folks, decolonization is a matter of survival. It's a way, and for those who are not familiar, if anyone is not familiar with this concept of decolonization, there's no way to encapsulate all of these senses,
Clearly.
but it is it is a process of reclamation and asserting of our own sovereignty, particularly as people who are indigenous or of indigenous descent. And that is more than land acknowledgments at the beginning of the church service. And it is more than buying a sage bundle on Etsy.com. I do mean the snark there. That was very intentional. It is a really complex, lifelong process that is about things like restitution and the returning of lands and the ability to, again, to have full autonomy as people who are living on the margins. It is so much more than the way it has been watered down in most spaces, much like intersectionality.
Yeah.
So for me, it's been a survival process.
Yeah. And I love it, because land acknowledgments aren't inherently good or bad, right?
No,
It's a method, it's a tactic. For some, it's the first time they thought about the fact that there was
absolutely.
anyone here.
Absolutely. What happens is we take those things and then we stay in that space and we don't move into what is supposed to come after that.
Right.
That's the problem.
Right. Because I remember when reconciliation as a term of what the church is supposed to be doing about race was inspirational at one very evangelical point for me.
Sure.
And now it is a red flag for me.
Yep. Same.
Now, red flag doesn't necessarily mean that I, as a professional, can't engage, but for the average person, I personally don't desire to see people be in spaces that just think about racial reconciliation, because to me, it informs me that there's all of this, we just need to get back to, right? That's right. The idea of reconciliation.
When were we there, first of all?
Right.
We're being very honest.
Right. We're not getting back to anything that existed, but somehow we have created this little fictional narrative that there is something that we're going back to that was better than what we have. And unless we're talking about prehistory, when we had all kinds of ways of existing in the world that were not based on Western domination, that were not informed and shaped by European settlers and colonizers. Yeah. Unless we're talking about going back there, which we usually aren't. It's just like, no, I don't. Yeah, I'm gonna keep it a buck. I'm gonna keep it 100. I do get sad. Yeah. Because, and you even mentioned this about nonprofit work, which is, I'm probably gonna end up getting in some good stuff in that too. There's certain patterns that we've seen over and over and over again. And so often it's about that. How do I make myself feel better about this thing I finally recognized as injustice? But then you have to do this whole other layer of work to go, yeah. And the don't say no just say no to drugs campaign. Don't say no to drugs. Just say no to drugs campaign. Well-intentioned, but it was a part of an oppressive movement, right?
Very much so. Yeah.
The ways that the reconciliation ideal, even though within itself isn't inherently bad, it's often attached to people who will literally talk over the experiences of people of color to say, no, you're being divisive. Right. And you're making white people feel bad. And that's a problem. And so I'm going to shut you down. Right. And I'm more invested in correcting you, person of color, than I am in seeing how I'm maintaining a system that doesn't actually cause me as the oppressed to be more free. Right, right. I've had to actually ask somebody, because I don't get into Facebook comment parties like I once did, but that's
also a survival tactic.
Hello. My go-to used to be, we real big and bad on the keyboard. Call me. Let's talk about this on the phone. And then when for the small percentage of people who would call me, I'd ask them. It was like, they're like, well, Darren, you're just not seeing it the right way, or you just, what you're doing just isn't the right way, or it isn't helpful. Yeah. And I'm like, okay. And typically it'd be somebody who I could at least say, hey, are we in agreement that there's lots of things wrong. Yes. And you saying that what I'm doing is wrong. Yes. And so you want to spend your time with all the things that are wrong on fixing
Right.
me.
Your presentation of a very real thing.
Right.
Not even the subject matter, just the presentation.
Right.
Yeah.
And to ask is that the intention? Because maybe it's not. Maybe we just didn't realize what we're doing. Is that the intention? And is that how the world is going to get better? Because you fixed me, who's definitely spent more time on this than you.
Yeah.
But you didn't like the way I said this, or that I used a certain word, or the semantics of how I engaged XYZ.
Yeah.
And that's where that sadness is, because it's like it's been 2 decades of me doing this, and not that I do any of it with the idea that, at some point we're going to be done and I can hang up my bullhorn. but I'm really trying to hold space for the fact that like this is a lot of emotional labor.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so I really appreciate the way you again, you have lived in a way that's let me see that I'm not alone, that I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think, I named earlier talking about these things that we recreate, this toxicity that we recreate. One of those is the idea that at the end of the day, we're alone in this work. And not only that we're alone, but that the responsibility we hold is so great that if we loosen our grip even a little bit on that sense of responsibility, if we pause, if we rest, that whatever goes wrong in the movement, whatever happens is now going to land at our doorstep, because we had the audacity to care for ourselves and one another in the midst of doing the work. And to me, that is one of the most pervasive problems in justice spaces, is whether it's ego or fear or messaging that we've internalized. A lot of us believe if we don't keep going, everything will fail and it will be our fault. And that is a lack of imagination and a lack of feeling unified in the process.
Yeah.
It's not all our job to do on our own.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That idea of this rugged individualism, which you didn't say, but
that's it.
I think it informs it, right?
For sure.
The Western American value that we need to be self-sufficient, that we need to have all this stuff on our own, is very contrary to what many of the global majority, people of color, live by.
Right.
Whereas collectivist society, collectivist decisions, seeing yourself in the context of others is much more innate. And as such, decisions and what justice looks like is much more than, well, we just have to get each individual's heart to change, and only Jesus can do that. It's like, yeah, no, we are a society that lives and creates oppression together. So as a society, we're going to have to collectively change some laws, and collectively change some church policies, and collectively do things that will then catch up to people's hearts and minds and individual opinions. But could you anything coming to mind for you about this contrast of what it means to be an individual versus collective?
Yeah, I mean, the phrase that I've been talking about a lot recently, I was actually just talking about it today with the group that I was with, is this concept of radical imagination, which I feel like is a term that is used a little bit in justice spaces, but it doesn't necessarily have the traction that I wish it would. And it comes out of, Black womanist work, because so many of the great things do. And so all credit there again. But I think even as in the spaces where we do talk about this idea of radical imagination, which is truly just casting off all limitations in our ability to say where we want to be and what is going to take us to get there and what is possible. One of the ways in which, again, I think we dilute all of these things, the way we dilute radical imagination is we take it and we go, now I have to have a radical imagination. I have to figure out what we're going to do moving forward. And literally at the core of radical imagination is the idea that it is a collective practice. that it cannot be done in an individual way, or is not meant to be done in an individual way. And yet somehow so many of us have taken even this thing that should be freeing us a bit, and we've gone like, how can we tighten like our shackles even more in terms of it? And we managed to do the opposite with it. So I think if we could have truly collective radical imagination, that would be a really beautiful starting place. Yeah.
Oh gosh. Speaking of imaginations, you are looking gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
And you mentioned earlier about like how sometimes you have a thirst trap for the Lord.
Yes. Yes.
And I've heard you talk in the past about how your body as a woman of color,
that woman,
as a Latina, that it's been demonized and scrutinized and critiqued and just all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
Could you share a little of that background, and then maybe take us to where you are now, where you are embracing and you are living your gorgeous life?
Thank you. Yeah. So one, I feel like the messaging that I've been carrying around and still am carrying to a certain degree comes from a few different places. And so one is the adoptive mother that I lived with for quite a while before I ended up in the foster care system was very verbally and psychologically abusive. And so a lot of the messaging I received, and I'll speak openly and frankly, was like, I hit puberty and I barely understood what was happening to my body before my mother was saying, you look like a whore, because I had developed, and so what that messaging does to a child, I'm sure you can imagine. And then I turned 17 and I age out of the system, and I go off to college by myself, and I become a part of a college ministry, and that's where I become a Christian. And the messaging I received for years from that college ministry was, you look like a whore. Not because anything you're doing. It doesn't matter if I have the oversized t-shirt and the baggy sweater to try and hide my body. I'm still fat and curvy and brown.
The 90s. We weren't wearing skinny jeans yet.
Hey now, 2002 college. I'm just kidding.
I have a slightly different reference.
I'm totally kidding. And so I had that messaging, and then I just had the messaging that is literally the ocean of like that society has placed us in, where it's just constant bombardment of your body is wrong and your body is dangerous and your body is somehow simultaneously utterly undesirable and utterly desirable. And therefore, because it's desirable, oh, did we mention again, you're a whore? And I use that word very purposely, because that is the word that has been used to tell me, regardless of my actions, purely for my presentation. And so it's been years of unlearning that before I could get to the place where I could post a picture of myself and feel some confidence. And then you throw in, like, particularly the fat phobia and the racism, because the college ministry I was a part of was almost entirely white. I was one of, you can count it on one hand, the women of color, the people of color. And so everything about my body was wrong. I was told in explicit and implicit ways that my body was wrong. And so it's been a reclamation process. I curse a thirst trap. Sometimes it is just because, like, hey, I feel like I look damn good. And sometimes it's like, I'm going to do it because everything in my mind is telling me you're not supposed to do that. Nobody wants to see that. And God doesn't want you doing that. And I have to challenge those ideas.
Yeah. Our how we see ourselves, our imagination of our bodies, how we imagine what it means to be embodied, not just like, oh, we're the body of Christ, but we are fearfully and wonderfully, beautifully, physically made.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I've been in my own process. Again, I'm just gonna like have my whole life and just cite you as the but I've been in my own process, in my own spaces, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly, exploring things. For example, I last year I lost somebody that I was dating to a substance use related death.
Yeah.
And when that happened, one, it came up for me that we don't really have great ways to talk about that, right? Like if somebody passes away, it's either the nosy folks are like, how'd they die? Or you like trying to honor the memory of this person by not talking about and having them be remembered
by erasing some parts of their story.
Right. You know? And so I've been on my own journey to one name that and do work around addressing methamphetamine use, especially amongst Black gay men, because it's still seen as a white suburban issue, and it is very much an urban problem for a number of reasons. But also because there's not like a strong set of traditions and rituals to go with how you mourn that kind of loss. I've been creating my own. I've been queering my own rituals, and I've been using my own holy imagination to create spaces for myself that are sacred, that are sensual. Like I'm just putting all my stuff on Front Street today, but I so it's always he passed in around Easter last year, and some of his expression was just very non-typical gender for a cis male person. And so part of how I've been exploring and remembering that is like dressing up sometime. And so like after the normal or the typical Sunday morning Easter stuff, it was like, oh, I am feeling this sadness in my body. And I put on a skirt, and I like, did my hair differently, and I dressed up, and then I invited a few of my friends who could hold that space with me, to just be praying with me, light a candle, lit my room. I mean, it looks like this rainbow color most of the time anyway, but I put every version of a light and a sparkle that I had into it, and just created this space to explore, to physically embody myself and imagine this other character, and to do some of my own deprogramming. I remember talking about stuff we hear in church. I remember one New Year's Eve in the church that I now call a cult. As a young man, I had on a shirt that was, it was New Year's Eve service, so it was unbuttoned probably to the middle of my my chest. But it's a shirt that's unbuttoned, but there's still a whole jacket over it and everything. And one of the elders, she came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, you need to button that up.
Stumbling block.
I was like, oh, I didn't even know men could actually have any correction in this. I'm about to make you spit your drink out. But I remember it was one of the first times that I felt handsome. And the first thing that she did was come and shut that down. Right?
Stealing joy.
Right. Yeah. So now it's this thing of I need to reclaim my body in the act of worship. I need to reclaim my my beauty and my and all these other parts that God gave me, not just the way that I can speak well or pray well or sing or something, but I'm a whole person. That's not just in here.
And your body is just as holy as your spirit.
Yeah. So this we're talking about all this stuff because this is not a part of the agenda of what it looks like to do justice in many spaces. Right. It's very in here. It's very intellectual, not often embodied. And that does a disservice to people who are living with various kinds of disabilities. It does a disservice to women and people who are socialized as female. It limits us in a lot of ways. But I want to, because my brain's all over, I want to pivot a little bit more, and I, for all these years that I've known you and we've been doing work together, especially in LGBTQ spaces, I understand that you are still practicing the heterosexual lifestyle.
It's a chronic, I said I have chronic health issues. I said it at the beginning. But yes.
I threw myself off. It was my own setup. I'm done. Tell me about your allyship, because again, there's some names I'm struggling not to name, but there are people who are cisgender and heterosexual who have worked in LGBTQ space and have taken all of the room, all the book deals and the movies and the organizations and platforms. Why didn't you just take it all?
I feel like that question sets me up. Like, I can't answer that in any way that doesn't make me sound super like, oh, I'm just so good at this. No, I think I can't speak to how other people process things. I can say for myself, as a woman, as an immigrant, as somebody with disabilities, as a person of color, like, I know what it feels like when people who are not a part of the community come in. And I talk about this all the time when I talk about interlocking justice. I talk about integrity being one of the core practices of interlocking justice is the practice of integrity. And one of the ways that I explain that to people is having alignment between who you are politically, professionally, and personally. And what that means for me is I don't understand how you can learn about a concept or be invited into a space for a people group, on Monday, and then not even be, we'll go with LGBTQ inclusion, not even be affirming on Monday. By Tuesday, you're like, okay, I think I'm on board. And by Wednesday, you've launched your podcast. By Thursday, your book deal is out. And Friday, the tour begins. And it truly feels like it's that fast. The whiplash is amazing. Yeah. And so I've seen what that looks like to communities I'm a part of. I know what it feels like for communities that I'm a part of. And so I don't want to replicate that for others.
Yeah.
At all.
And I love that grounding, right? You're grounding yourself in your experience. You understand what it feels like. And you're saying, I don't have to be a queer person to know what it feels like to have somebody from outside come in and just run the show.
Suck up all the air in the room. Yeah.
And I think that's so important, because it's not that any of us are incapable of taking up too much space and stealing the stage. It's more so that we all need to know what keeps us in a healthy place, what keeps us mindful, what keeps us focused on what our role is. That, humility isn't, oh, I need to think lowly of myself. Humility is very much having a right assessment, a correct assessment of where we are. And so there's some places where I'm like, yes, I'm an expert. I'm going to say what I said. Right. And there are other places is like, I think it's this. And I have heard and learned from XYZ and this person and that person that it's that. But at the end of the day, I am going to defer.
Right. Because I'm a
amplify
guest.
those other voices.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, goodness. For those who maybe are just joining, I just want to say again, we're having a fishbowl conversation. That is conversation between people who are, it's just AnaYelsi and I. But the chat is open and I am watching the chat as well. We'll take a quick break because we've been talking for a moment. I need to get some water, but we'll take a quick break. All right, so we're back and Carrie's invited us to talk about the joys of EDI work. What comes to mind, Jelsi?
I'm gonna be annoying and be that person who goes like, I don't do DEI work, but I'll explain why I say that. really unexciting part of it is one that like DEI at its roots is very much like a corporate concept. And so it often plays out like that because that is its roots. It's a list of it's a checkbox list, and it's a way to be HR compliant, and it often the end result is we did just enough to not get in trouble, as opposed to that radical imagination we were talking about earlier. So I don't personally use that language. Like, I have certifications and stuff in that because it makes some people feel better to be like, you have that. but I would argue that's not what I do. And I do specifically call what I do interlocking justice work. And as far as where the joy is, I would two things. One, the joy is very much in the creativity in the approach that I try to take to this work. And so, and when I say creativity, you know, I mentioned earlier, I'm a writer and I'm a painter. You can see the horrible mess of supplies behind me. But I bring that into the work I do with communities, and it doesn't have to be as complex as, you know, paint a canvas or something, but I do games with folks, and I do arts and crafts, and I do, like, we're going to act things out, and we're going to do writing projects together. And all of it is, so I spent quite a few years working with children when I was, you know, trying to make money in college. And honestly, a lot of it, I'm like, what did I enjoy doing with the kids? All right, how can I make adults do that and not know that I'm making them do things I did with 3-year-olds? Like, and every time it's a really joyful experience, because I don't think adults are given permission to play. We're not given permission to just have fun. And I think we look at justice work and liberation work as not play. It's work, it's labor, it's the movement, and we just suck all of the joy out of it. And so I want to get messy with people, and I want to make things with people, and I want to create with folks, and I want to do that in service of justice and liberation. And for me, that's the joyful way.
Yeah, and I love that you brought us back to your art, because as a plug for both of us, AnaYelsi did, and I'm dropping the link. I'll add the photo into the video later, but I'm dropping the link to the cover that was painted for my band's most recent album, Love Greater Than Fear. And, you know, again, it was just this opportunity to invite someone that I love from the work that I've been doing into this work of a band that is progressive and Christian, and trying to meet the need of what, you know, the current Christian top 30 doesn't meet.
Right.
You know, where we do make room for justice, where we talk about guns and violence, and we talk about where is God in all of this. And so I love that, this idea that it's not simply like this spiritual bypassing of the hard stuff, but it's like, no, let's imagine a new world and draw it. Let's, you know, create this art that reflects where we are in the moment, and let's do this. But it's the same for me, the work that I get to do with my band, with the many, singing the music that everyone says, why don't we have more of this in the church, right? Creating that music is not easy work, but it is joyful work. It is like, how awesome is it that I can say that this is what I do. And while there's no ethical consumption under capitalism,
right,
but it's nice that the way that I'm paying my rent in some ways is creating music that is the kind of thing that I want to see in the world. And I've actually had
go ahead. Well, I was just going to add a little thing to that, because so, you know, I go and spend so much time with so many communities. The album that I play the most in those spaces, when I need music in the space, I kid you not, I'm not blowing smoke. It is The Many. I play y'all's music for the last couple of years. That is almost exclusively what I play in the spaces I'm in. So it is very much helping to cultivate the spaces I'm trying to create.
Right. Like I put it out there. My intention is that we would provide some of the soundtrack for the justice movement. You know, you look back at the civil rights movement, there's music you look back at various justice movements, music and art have unified and mobilized so many. And that's creativity doesn't happen because you got real angry and you just like, okay, and we create, right? I mean, yes, you can have that moment.
I have a few angry paintings, but
right,
proceed.
Right. But it is also this time where you spend time together. You know, as a band, we eat together and we talk about what's going on, and we share life. And out of that comes the art that we do. Out of that comes the liturgies that we create. Or when I think about, you know, a critical part of my training in grassroots community organizing, the toxic church I was a part of, it was the opportunity for me as somebody who's interested in photography to show up at the rallies and the marches and the protests we were doing and just be capturing what was happening.
Right.
It
Which
got
is
me
so
into
crucial.
the space, right?
Yeah.
And again, it's one of those things I remember on several occasions, not so much recently, but through different years, through different movements, through different organizations I've been a part of, through different churches, going, oh, but all I'm doing is taking pictures, or all I'm doing is, you know, singing, or all I'm doing is some art piece that I do, and somehow making that less than other parts of what's happening.
Wow. Yeah.
Right?
It's literally what shapes the narratives, and the narratives are where so much of the power lies. It's vital.
Right.
Vital work.
I had to be reminded that it is because I'm telling these stories through art, is because I'm capturing this stuff and documenting and showing and motivating people through these artistic creations, that more people are involved, that other people find out what's happening, that the photos do tell the story. And in contrast, there's a lot of power there, because I remember I'm not doing as much photography these days because I'm, I only have 24 hours in the day, and I don't think that's right. And I'm protesting that, but
clearly racism. So
it's ungodly, but, so I'm not taking on photography right now, but I remember, I've gone down another rabbit hole. Photography, telling the stories.
You're not doing it as much now.
I'm not doing it as much. Well, the other point I was going to make will come back, but this other point, I remember really struggling with, and still do, high key, struggling with charging to do the work, charging to do this stuff, and feeling, one, it comes from people who have told you, oh, we don't need to pay for that. We can get that for free,
right,
which takes away from the agency and the capacity for artists to create. But it also instills this idea that what you're doing actually isn't valuable.
Right.
And it comes from people in your church. It comes from people in your family. It comes from your friends who are always asking for a discount.
They should be the first ones in line to be like, let me not only pay full price, but give a little something extra. If we're being honest.
And so it's another reminder that for us to do this work together, that it really means we have to do life together. We have to invest in one another. We have to put each other up for opportunities to do this. You know, maybe you can't pay somebody, but you know an organization or a corporation that can.
Right. I mean, that's why, like, not to plug something, but like that's why I started En Conjunto, the collective that I have. It's specifically for folks of color who are working at the intersection of justice and spirituality, and has a heavy focus on those of us who are doing it with disabilities and with chronic illness. But it is meant to serve that purpose, as we are the first ones on the chopping block when it comes to like, when people are going, how can I be extractive? How can I get, as much as possible for as little as possible? How can I devalue you? And it's like, well, go to the people of color because they're just desperate for exposure. They're just desperate for an open door. Like, and it's so exploitative. And so, and Conjunto was a way for us to come together and say, like, even as people who are working independently, because we're folks who are not working under the banner or protection of an organization. Even as folks are working independently, we can work collaboratively. We can work in community. We can offer one another support and wisdom and experience and some protection. And it's directly in response to the way in which people choose to act extractively, choose to take from one another.
Right. And again, like you were one, you and the work that we were doing back there was one of the first to invest in me in this regard. And just to, it's funny, it set a really, really good precedent. It was like, oh, I've been like raising funds and scraping together to get places. And it was like, you mean yeah, y'all are
sending out support letters or whatever it is. The number of orgs I worked for that never actually paid me, I just found money and then they gave it back.
that part, it really did reset my imaginations and so, and I'm still in process. I'm still figuring it out. But yeah, there's a joy in being able. There's a joy in how we can support each other. There's a joy in how we can create and co-create together. There's so many opportunities when we do work together, when we do see it. It's not just what can I do, it's what can we do.
Right.
And I love that. I love that it reflects the Trinity. Let us, let us create, all these things that God, depending on your interpretation, but that God did in the beginning to help us see and do all this stuff. It's profound how much we can come out of, or what can come out of us from this. So if we spend a little bit looking toward the future, are there things that you're hoping for in general or specifics?
In regards to my life or justice work or
yes, and because they're very intertwined.
Yes. I mean, on the personal level, like I'm working on writing this book about interlocking justice. I really I'm trying to act with confidence, even if I'm not fully experiencing it, because imposter syndrome is, I don't even know if it's imposter syndrome, if the world is telling you that, but whatever it is, feeling some of it. And so I'm working on that book because I want to invite more folks into this conversation about how can we do this in a more collaborative way, in a more holistic way, in a more creative and joyful way. And for justice and liberation as a whole, honestly, I'm hoping that there's truth to a conversation that I had a couple of weeks ago. I was in New Mexico working with an interfaith reproductive justice group for a few days on the interlocking justice work. And one of the conversations that came up is how there are these points, these touch points in history where we see really painful periods. And I would say that we are coming through one of those right now from really 2014 Black Lives Matter and then Trump and it's just been pain after pain after pain point. And the thing that these people were saying was often after that that valley, you see this moment of newfound inspiration, commitment, enthusiasm for the work. And I honestly I'm having some days where I'm just holding on for that moment. I'm really hoping that we're in the climb part right now and we're coming out of that valley, because I'm guessing a lot of folks on this call could really use a period of hopefulness and regeneration and creativity. And so I'm hanging in there and I think we're in the midst of it happening.
Yeah. For
Yeah.
me, I'm on the personal end, I'm like restructuring and reorganizing a lot of what I do business wise and consulting wise. And like I said, I pulled back on the photography so that hopefully I can get back to it as a hobby and something that it
Yeah.
originally was for me, right?
And
It
just
wasn't
enjoy
a
it.
business first. It
Yeah.
was what I love to do.
It's not
Um,
worth anything if you don't commodify
oh God, right?
it.
And then pushing into exploring things like I am doing more with video. I am doing more on the production side, both in live streaming for my church and for
Mhm.
other organizations, as well as it's like, hmm, I want to try creating some film stuff or just whatever,
Right.
just because.
Yeah.
And that it's so important for us to, as humans who are creative, to do things that we're not necessarily good at,
Mhm.
right? Like we need to create room to fail and to mess up and to try again and or to do something just for fun, not because it has
Yeah.
to be good,
Just for the experience.
right? We
Yeah.
have to do all that stuff. Um, and then I'm also reworking how I conceive uh of the future. Like um you mentioned, that those moments of peace, and it's just I hope we can have, just a just that moment to exhale.
Exhale.
I and I won't go way deep into it, but when I saw you in January in DC,
Oh, we're so happy.
um we the the part that I feel fine saying is that we've had institutions create barriers to the relationship that we have.
Yes. Mhm.
And what I realized out of that time was that the most important thing I have is the relationships,
Yeah.
because all these institutions, including this one, can someday go away.
Right.
But we are still people who are connected and have relationship.
Yeah.
And that has been so much more impactful than the institutions that empower a lot of stuff, right? Like
Yeah.
if one institution hadn't hired me to come and do the workshop, I wouldn't have gotten connected. And
Right.
there's lots of not just because again, when we change the world, institutions have to change for the change to
Right.
happen.
Right.
But at the end of the day, the institutions are a means to an end.
Yep.
And I am reimagining the world and work that I do through the relationships I have. And
Yeah.
so if I'm hiring somebody, I'm hiring people that I would be friends with.
Mhm.
If I'm working with somebody or if I'm going to be loyal to a person versus the institution, I'm going to choose the person
Right.
because at the end of the day, the institution is going to protect itself.
Right.
And I want us to live in a world that prioritizes people over institutions, people over
Okay.
corporations, people over rules, because the rules don't serve people.
Mhm.
They serve these things that we made up.
Yeah. And I talk with people about this a lot. And as I say, one of the things I'll say is if we're so committed to either the institution that we see as like our primary place, or we're so committed to the what I call our home movement. So like it might be racial justice or LGBTQ justice, whatever it might be, whatever. If you're so committed to those entities, um, that is not the same thing as being committed to justice and liberation.
Mhm.
And you're at some point going to run up into those two things being in direct opposition to one another,
I
and you'll be forced to make a decision.
say that again because that was really important because you nuanced the movement, air
Mhm.
quotes. Say that. Can you say that again?
Yeah. If your loyalty is first and foremost to the institution or the home movement that you belong to, that means it's not to justice and liberation. And at some point, those two things will be in opposition. And I think that's what we run into. You fall away, you walk away, or you're pushed out.
Hmm. And we've seen it so many times where we're here because of the mission. We're here because we do believe in something.
Right.
And we find people that are often on the same page as us in believing in this hopeful thing. But then the institution, the movement, the who's in charge, the who got fired, the who's got a different version of the movement that they want to see take root.
Politics of it.
All of that ends up breaking down. And we start choosing movements, and we start choosing other things more than we choose the people. And we don't get the justice, and we don't get the liberation.
Not only do we not live out of relationship and commitment to one another, we start seeing one another as direct adversaries.
That part.
And I'm not sure who that's supposed to serve other than the very systems we're challenging.
Exactly. You know, I mean, and we know that it happened in the civil rights movement, where there were people planted just to get us to fight with each other.
Yep.
We know that it is a strategic tactic that was documented and published, that if you want to disrupt a movement, get people to fight with each other. Get people to
do we have time for a funny story of that actually happening? So I was at back in 2016, I went and spent a few weeks at Standing Rock, and the fight against the Dakota Access Pipeline in North Dakota. And I remember being in one of the kitchen tents, just sitting at the table, and this white woman older woman sits across from me, and just kind of starts to have a conversation. I had never seen her before, during my time at the camp. And she starts asking questions, but like they were so poorly asked. She might as well have walked in with a baseball cap that just said like plant. Like
I'd like to buy 2 drugs, please.
Yeah. Well, she's like, she kind of does one of these. She's like, don't you think we should get violent? Like, shouldn't we just sitting across from her being like, no. But it was the way she did it. I was like, if this is how all of them are doing it, I think we're okay. Sorry, I just had to share that. It was just so overt and so poorly done.
That's it. That's it. That is the moment. We are going to keep our eyes open, and we're going to keep our hearts open, and we're going to see where we are, to see the struggle, to see those who are pouring into us and building us up, to see those who are definitely not on the same page, and definitely not supporting justice, not supporting the liberation. We can't tell it all today. But I'm so thankful for you. You are one of the women who I've been trying all the ways I can find to privately and publicly thank for the ways that you have shaped my life, that you have empowered me to live out my calling, really. And so it's an honor to work alongside you.
Likewise.
And I'm so thankful that you are here with us. And we'll be praying for the continued flourishing of all the things you set your hand to. Just as a because I don't want to forget, if you could drop into the chat any places that we should look for you, or name it, any websites or anything that we should find you on.
My website's very easy. It's AnaYelsi.com. There aren't a lot of people with my name, so AnaYelsi.com, and on social media, it is Brown Eyed Amazon with a bunch of the vowels taken out. I put it in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you again for being
You're
with
welcome.
us.
Thanks.
And we love you to bits and pieces.
Thank you. I enjoyed this so much. I appreciate it.